Erin Heather Corwin came into the world on a humid July evening, July 15, 1994, in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a town cradled by the gentle swells of the Cumberland Plateau. The hospital room was small, its walls a faded yellow, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and the distant hum of cicadas through an open window. Lore Hevelin, her mother, lay exhausted but radiant, her dark hair plastered to her forehead as she cradled her fourth child. Bill, her father, stood beside her, his rough hands trembling slightly as he touched the tiny, squirming bundle wrapped in a hospital blanket. "She's perfect," he murmured, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over construction sites. They named her Erin, a nod to Lore's Irish roots, and Heather, after the wildflowers that dotted the fields near their home. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, take a moment to comment below where you're watching from, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification button so you never miss another gripping unknown crime story. Oak Ridge wasn't a bustling metropolis, it was a sleepy place of 30,000 souls, its streets lined with clapboard houses and oak trees, its history tied to the secretive labs that once birthed the atomic bomb. By the 1990s, it had settled into a quieter existence, a town of government workers, retirees, and families like the Hevelins, who lived paycheck to paycheck but rich in love. Their home on Orchard Lane was a single-story affair, its white siding peeling at the edges, its front yard a patchwork of grass and clover where Erin's older siblings, Michael, Daniel, and Sarah, had worn paths with their bikes and bare feet. Inside, the house smelled of Lore's cooking, chicken and dumplings, cornbread fresh from the oven, and the faint musk of old furniture, hand-me-downs from Bill's parents. Erin was the baby, arriving 7 years after Sarah, the next youngest. Michael was already 14, a lanky boy with a mop of brown hair and a penchant for tinkering with car engines, while Daniel, 11, was the dreamer, always lost in a book or sketching fantastical creatures. Sarah, at 9, took to Erin immediately, declaring herself her protector and dressing her up in doll clothes until Erin's squalls put an end to it. Lore often said Erin was her easiest child. No colic, no tantrums, just a quiet curiosity that shone through her wide hazel eyes. She'd sit for hours in her high chair, watching the world with a stillness that belied her age, her tiny fingers grasping at dust motes in the sunlight. By the time Erin could walk, she'd found her true north, the stables down the road at Miller's farm. The farm was a ramshackle spread, its red barn weathered by decades of Tennessee summers, its pastures home to a dozen horses owned by a grizzled widower named Jim Miller. Lore worked part-time there, mucking stalls to supplement Bill's income, and she'd bring Erin along, plopping her in a playpen beside the tack room while she shoveled manure. But Erin wasn't content to stay penned, she'd toddle to the fence, her chubby hands gripping the rails, her eyes locked on the horses as they grazed. Jim took a shine to her, calling her Little Bit, and hoisting her onto a gentle mare named Daisy when she was barely 3. "She's got the touch," he'd say, watching Erin pat Daisy's flank without a hint of fear. That touch defined Erin's childhood. By 5, she was a fixture at the stables, her sneakers caked with mud, her arms strong from lugging feed buckets. She learned to groom, running a curry comb in circles over Daisy's coat, picking burrs from her mane, and to saddle up, her small frame perched proudly atop a pony named Speckles by age 7. Lore marveled at her daughter's ease with the animals, how she'd whisper to them like old friends, her voice a soft lilt that calmed even the spookiest colts. "I want to be a vet," Erin declared one evening, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, a library book about animal anatomy open in her lap. She was 8, her hair in pigtails, her determination as solid as the oak table beside her. School was a different story. Oak Ridge Elementary was a low brick building a mile from home, its playground a sea of gravel where Erin spent recesses chasing butterflies or sketching in the dirt with a stick. She loved science, dissecting flowers in 3rd grade, memorizing the bones of a frog in 5th. But math was her nemesis. Numbers danced on the page, refusing to stay put, and her report cards bore CS beside her as in art and biology. Teachers called her sweet but distractible, her mind often drifting to the stables or the stray cats she'd coax home. Dusty, a wiry terrier mix with one floppy ear, was her proudest rescue. She'd found him shivering under a porch at 9, nursed him with scraps, and cried when Bill relented and let him stay. Her siblings shaped her too. Michael taught her to ride a bike, steadying her wobbles until she pedaled free down Orchard Lane. Daniel read her Tolkien, his voice weaving tales of hobbits and dragons as they sprawled on the porch, fireflies blinking around them. Sarah was her confidant, braiding Erin's hair and giggling over boy bands. Backstreet Boys posters plastered their shared room. But as the older 3 grew, Michael to trade school, Daniel to college dreams, Sarah to high school dramas, Erin remained the constant, the little sister who bridged their gaps with her quiet presence. Jonathan Corwin entered Erin's life in the fall of 2007, when she was 13 and he was 14, a freshman at Oak Ridge High. He was a gangly boy with sandy hair and freckles, his shoulders hunched as if apologizing for his height. They met in biology, paired for a lab dissecting earthworms, Erin's steady hands guiding the scalpel while Jonathan scribbled notes, his handwriting a messy scrawl. "You're good at this," he said, peering over his glasses, and Erin grinned, her cheeks pink. It was a small moment, but it stuck. Jonathan lived 3 streets over, in a duplex with his mom, Linda, a nurse who worked nights, and his dad, Tom, a mechanic with a drinking problem that kept him in and out of jobs. Money was tight. Jonathan's clothes were secondhand, his sneakers patched with duct tape, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity, his hazel eyes sharp with a determination to rise above. He wasn't loud like the jocks or artsy like the theater kids. He was the boy who fixed the AV cart when it jammed, who lingered in the library reading military histories instead of joining the cafeteria chaos. Their friendship grew slowly, shared walks home, talks about teachers or the stray dogs Jonathan fed behind his house. By sophomore year it was more. He asked her to homecoming in 2009, stammering as he handed her a daisy he'd plucked from a ditch, and Erin said yes, her heart thudding. She wore a thrift store dress, blue with faded lace, and he borrowed a suit from his cousin, ill-fitting but earnest. They danced awkwardly in the gym, the air sticky with sweat and cheap cologne, and when he kissed her cheek under the bleachers, Erin felt the world shift. They were a pair after that, Jonathan and Erin, the quiet kids who'd rather hike the trails at Hall Ridge Park than party by the river. He'd enlisted by senior year, 2011, drawn to the Marines for its promise of structure and escape. Erin, a junior, rode him through boot camp, her letters full of doodles and news. Dusty chased a raccoon, Sarah's dating a jerk, I miss you. When he graduated, resplendent in his dress blues, she ran to him on the Paris Island parade field, her arms around his neck, tears mixing with laughter. They married in August 2012, Erin 18 and fresh from her own graduation, Jonathan 19 and newly minted a private. The wedding was at First Baptist, a squat brick church off Main Street, the pews half full with family and a few friends. Erin's dress was simple, white cotton she'd hemmed herself, her bouquet wildflowers from a field near Miller's farm. Jonathan stood stiff in his uniform, his palms sweaty as he slipped a $20 ring from Walmart onto her finger. Laura wept, Bill clapped Jonathan's shoulder, and the reception was cake and punch in the church basement, the air buzzing with hope. In June 2013, Jonathan's orders came. Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, 29 Palms, California. Erin packed their life into a U-Haul. Her clothes, his uniforms, a box of books, Dusty's bed, her stomach nodding as they said goodbye to Oak Ridge. The drive west was 2,000 miles, 3 days of gas station coffee and AM radio, Dusty whining in the backseat. Erin stared out at the plains, then the Rockies, then the endless sand, her heart sinking as green gave way to brown. 29 Palms was a shock. The base sprawled across 932 square miles of Mojave Desert, its housing units squat and beige, its horizon broken by mountains and Joshua trees, their gnarled limbs like something from a Dr. Seuss book. The heat hit 110 degrees Fahrenheit that first day, the air so dry it sucked the breath from Erin's lungs. Their apartment, Building 12, Unit 4, was a concrete box, 2 bedrooms, a kitchenette, a living room with a view of a gravel lot. Erin unpacked with forced cheer, hanging curtains she'd sewn from old sheets, arranging thrift store lamps, lining the sills with succulents she prayed wouldn't wilt. Jonathan was gone by 5 a.m. most days, a mechanic in the motor pool, his hands soon stained with grease. Erin was alone, Dusty her only company, his barks echoing off the walls. She walked the base, past the PX, the gym, the rows of identical homes, nodding to wives who eyed her with curiosity. She met Aisling at a spouse's coffee, a redhead from Ohio with a quick laugh, and they bonded over missing home. It grows on you, Aisling lied, and Erin nodded, wanting to believe it. The Lees lived 2 doors down, Christopher, Nicole, and Liberty. Chris was 24, a corporal with a hunter's build, his dark hair buzzed short, his eyes sharp. Nicole was 23, small and wiry, her blonde hair in a perpetual ponytail, her attention split between Liberty and a cashier job at the Dollar General off base. Liberty was 2, a whirlwind of curls and chatter, her crayons scattered across their stoop. Erin met them at a barbecue in July, hosted by a gunnery sergeant named Rodriguez. She brought brownies, Chris offered her a beer, and they talked, horses, hiking, the desert's odd beauty. Nicole hovered nearby, Jonathan ate silently, and Liberty tugged Aaron's sleeve, demanding a piggyback ride. The affair began in September 2013, subtle as a desert breeze. Chris lingered after a game night, Monopoly, cheap wine, laughter, helping Aaron stack chairs while Jonathan showered and Nicole put Liberty to bed. "You're different," he said, his voice low, and Aaron blushed, brushing it off. But the seed was planted. Text followed, "Hey, how's Dusty? Then, you look nice tonight." By October they were meeting, coffee at the base Starbucks, walks near the rec center, his Jeep parked in shadows where no one looked. Aaron was lonely, Jonathan's silence grew with his exhaustion, his kisses wrote. Chris was alive, his stories of Alaska hunts thrilling, his gaze making her feel seen. By November it was physical, a kiss behind the gym, then more, hurried and reckless. She hated the deceit but craved the rush, her guilt drowned by his whispers, "You're all I think about." Jonathan suspected nothing, Nicole was oblivious, and the bass churned on, its rhythm unbroken. In May 2014, Aaron's period stopped. A test from the PX confirmed it, pregnant. She told Chris in his Jeep, her hands shaking, expecting joy. His face tightened, "We'll figure it out," and dread crept in. She told Aisling, swearing her to secrecy, her voice breaking, "He'll leave her, right?" Aisling hugged her, silent. By June, Aaron dreamed of a proposal, blind to Chris's panic. On June 27th, he texted, "Tomorrow, Joshua Tree, I've got a surprise." She wrote Aisling, "I think it's happening," and told Jonathan she'd scout trails for Laura's visit. The lie was easy, her hope a fragile flame. June 28, 2014, broke hot and still. Aaron rose at 6 a.m., the apartment quiet, Jonathan asleep after a late shift. She fed Dusty, pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, tied her sneakers. Her neon coughed to life and she drove east, the desert a golden haze. Chris met her at a dirt road off Highway 62, his Jeep idling, his smile tight. "Follow me," he said, and she did, her heart racing. They parked near Bighorn Mine, a desolate stretch of sand and rock, mine shafts dotting the ground like wounds. He led her past boulders, the garrote in his pocket, his plan set. She chatted about the baby, the park, unaware. Then he struck, the cord around her neck, her screams lost to the wind. 5 minutes, her fight fading, her body limp. He dumped her down the shaft, tossed the tank, and fled, the desert swallowing her last breath. The sun was dipping below the horizon on June 28, 2014, casting long shadows across the beige sprawl of the 29 Palms Marine Corps base when Jonathan Corwin first felt the prickle of unease. It was 6:47 p.m., the sky a bruise of purple and orange, the heat still radiating off the asphalt in waves. Aaron had left that morning, her blue Dodge Neon rattling out of the parking lot, her voice bright with a promise to be back by afternoon. "I'm just scouting some trails for Mom," she'd said, her lips brushing his cheek, her hair smelling faintly of lavender shampoo. He'd nodded, half asleep after a grueling night shift in the motor pool, and watched her go, the door clicking shut behind her. Now hours later the apartment was too quiet. Dusty, their scruffy terrier mix, paced by the door, his nails clicking on the linoleum, his whines a low counterpoint to the hum of the air conditioner. Jonathan checked his phone, no texts, no missed calls. He dialed Aaron's number, the line going straight to voicemail, her chipper greeting, "Hey, it's Aaron, leave me a message," mocking the silence that followed. He tried again, then a third time, each unanswered ring tightening the knot in his gut. She'd never been gone this long without checking in, not since they'd moved to this desert outpost where cell service was spotty but reliable enough on base. He stepped onto the stoop, the evening air still thick with heat, and scanned the parking lot. No neon, no Aaron. The base buzzed with its usual rhythm. Marines jogging in formation, a Humvee rumbling past, wives chatting by the playground, but it felt wrong, like a picture with a piece missing. Jonathan pulled on his boots, grabbed Dusty's leash, and walked to Aisling's unit, 3 doors down. Aisling was Aaron's closest friend here, a 22-year-old from Ohio with a freckled nose and a laugh that cut through the desert stillness. Maybe Aaron had stopped there, lost track of time. Aisling answered the knock in sweatpants and a tank top, her red hair piled in a messy bun. "Hey John," she said, her smile fading as she saw his face. "What's up?" "Aaron's not back," he said, his voice rougher than he meant it. "She left this morning for Joshua Tree. You seen her?" Aisling's eyes widened, a flicker of something, guilt, crossing her face before she shook her head. "No, not since yesterday. She said she was scouting trails, right?" "Yeah." He shifted, Dusty tugging at the leash. "She's not answering her phone." Aisling bit her lip, hesitating. She knew about the affair, Aaron's whispered confession a month ago, the pregnancy bombshell last week, but she'd sworn not to tell. Now, with Jonathan's worry palpable, that secret felt like a stone in her throat. Maybe her battery died, she offered weakly. The park's huge. She could have gotten turned around. Maybe, Jonathan muttered, unconvinced. I'm gonna check with the MPs. He left Aisling standing there, her hands twisting in her shirt, and headed to the military police station, a squat building near the base entrance. The desk sergeant, a burly man named Ortiz with a buzz cut and a clipboard, took his report with practiced calm. Wife's missing, huh? When you last see her? Jonathan recounted the morning, Aaron's kiss, her hiking plan. His words clipped, his fingers drumming the counter. Ortiz jotted notes, then radioed a patrol to check the park's main roads. Could be a flat tire or heat exhaustion, he said. We'll start there. Go home, Corwin. We'll call you. Jonathan didn't go home. He drove his beat-up Ford pickup to Joshua Tree National Park, 20 miles east, Dusty panting beside him. The park's entrance was a lonely gate, its ranger station dark, a sign reading closed after 5 p.m. He ignored it, bumping down dirt roads, his headlights slicing through the dusk. He called Aaron's name out the window, his voice hoarse against the wind, but the desert gave nothing back, just sand, rock, and the eerie silhouettes of Joshua trees. By midnight, exhausted and hollow, he returned to base, the MP's promise of a morning search ringing in his ears. Sunday, June 29th, dawned with a blistering sun, the temperature clawing toward 105 degrees Fahrenheit. By 8 a.m. Jonathan hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaky as he brewed coffee he wouldn't drink. The MPs called at 7:15. A patrol had found Aaron's neon off a dirt track near the park's Covington Flat area, 5 miles from the main road. Keys are gone, purse is inside, Ortiz said over the phone. No sign of her. We're sending more guys out. Jonathan was there in 20 minutes, his truck skidding to a stop beside the neon. It sat forlornly in the dust, its blue paint dulled by sand, its driver's door ajar. 2 MPs stood guard, their radios crackling, while a third poked through the brush with a stick. Jonathan pushed past them, his heart hammering as he peered inside. Aaron's purse was on the passenger seat, wallet, lip balm, a half-empty water bottle, but her phone was dead, its screen black. Where is she? He demanded, his voice cracking. The MPs shrugged, one muttering about footprints lost to the wind. Word spread fast. By noon, the base was abuzz, Marines whispering in the chow hall, wives clustering by the PX, rumors sprouting like weeds. Heard she ran off, one said. Nah, car trouble, another countered. Aisling, guilt gnawing at her, called Lore in Tennessee, her voice trembling as she broke the news. She's missing Mrs. H. Since yesterday. Lore's gasp was audible, a sound of pure dread. We're coming, she said and hung up, already dialing Bill. In Oak Ridge, the Haviland house erupted into chaos. Lore, 52, petite with graying hair, dropped the phone and sank onto the couch, her hands over her mouth. Bill, 55, his face weathered from years in the sun, froze mid-step in the kitchen, a mug of coffee slipping from his grip to shatter on the tile. Missing? He echoed as if the word didn't fit. Sarah, now 28 and a nurse in Knoxville, drove over within the hour, her eyes red from crying. Michael and Daniel, scattered across the state, booked flights home. By 3 p.m. Lore and Bill were on a plane to LAX, a 4-hour flight that felt like eternity, their hands clasped tight, prayers unspoken. Back at 29 Palms, the search kicked into gear. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department joined the MPs, their helicopters thumping overhead, their SUVs kicking up dust along park trails. Volunteers trickled in, Marines off duty, spouses with water bottles and worried faces, locals who'd seen Aaron's photo on the news. Jonathan led a group, his boots pounding sand, his voice raw as he shouted her name. Aisling stayed behind, pacing her apartment, the weight of Aaron's secret crushing her resolve. Joshua Tree National Park is a beast of a place, 800 square miles of wilderness, its terrain a maze of canyons, washes, and rock piles, its silence broken only by the wind or the cry of a hawk. By June 30th, the search was a full-scale operation. Sheriff's deputies set up a command post at the park's Oasis Visitor Center, a sun-bleached building ringed by palms, its parking lot crammed with patrol cars and news vans. Captain Mike Reynolds, a grizzled veteran with a salt and pepper beard, took charge, his map of the park marked with red XS where teams had searched. Aaron's neon was towed to a lot for processing, its contents bagged, her purse, a granola bar wrapper, a park map with no notes. Footprints near the car were useless, erased by a breeze that swept through overnight. Reynolds briefed the press at noon, his voice steady. Aaron Corwin, 19, last seen June 28th. We're treating this as a missing person case. No evidence of foul play yet. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and the story hit the wires. CNN, Fox, local affiliates, Aaron's high school photo, all smiles and hazel eyes, plastered across screens. Lore and Bill arrived that afternoon, their rental car pulling into the base under a sky heavy with heat. Jonathan met them at the apartment, his uniform rumpled, his face a mask of exhaustion. Lore hugged him, her tears soaking his shoulder, while Bill gripped his arm, his voice thick. "We'll find her, son." They drove to the command post, where Reynolds briefed them, Aaron's car location, the search grid, the slim hope of a hiker's sighting. Lore clutched a flyer she'd made on the plane, Aaron's photo, missing in bold red, her hands trembling as she pressed it into deputies' palms. The searchers spread out like ants across the desert. Marines in camo trudged through scrub, their rifles swapped for water packs, their boots sinking into sand. Wives like Maria Rodriguez, wife of the barbecue-hosting gunnery sergeant, drove ATVs along trails, their eyes scanning for a glint of blue jeans or a scrap of t-shirt. Cavers from the Southern California Grotto, a volunteer group, rappelled into mine shafts, their headlamps piercing the dark, their radios crackling with clear after each descent. Helicopters swept low, their downdraft stirring dust devils, their pilots squinting for a figure in the vastness below. Days bled into nights, the heat unrelenting, 110 degrees Fahrenheit by day, dipping to 80 degrees Fahrenheit under a star-strewn sky. Volunteers rotated shifts, their faces sunburned, their voices hoarse. Jonathan barely slept, his pickup a fixture at search sites, his calls for Aaron echoing off canyon walls. Lore and Bill joined him, their Tennessee accents soft against the desert's harshness, their prayers a steady murmur. "She's out there," Lore insisted, her faith a lifeline though doubt gnawed at her edges. By July 2nd, whispers turned to Christopher Lee. He'd been at the Rodriguez barbecue the night before Aaron vanished, his laugh loud, his beer hand steady. Now he was quiet, too quiet, some said. Jonathan mentioned him to the MPs offhand. She knew him, they were friends, and deputies pulled him in that afternoon. Lee sat in a folding chair at the command post, his lean frame slouched, his dark eyes flicking to the floor. "I was shooting targets in the desert," he said, his voice flat. "Saturday morning out past Jumbo Rocks. Didn't see Aaron." Reynolds pressed. "You know her well?" "She's a neighbor," Lee shrugged. "We talk sometimes." "Anything more?" The question hung heavy. "Nope." Lee's jaw tightened, his hands in his pockets. His alibi was thin, no witnesses, no shell casings he could point to. Deputies drove to Jumbo Rocks, a boulder-strewn stretch 10 miles from Aaron's car, and found nothing. No tire tracks, no litter, just sand and silence. Back at base, Aisling cracked. She called Reynolds that night, her voice shaking over the line. Aaron was seeing him. Chris Lee. She was pregnant, thought it was his. The confession hit like a grenade. Reynolds dispatched a team to Lee's unit, where Nicole answered, Liberty on her hip. "He's at work," she said, her eyes narrowing. "What's this about?" Lee was re-interviewed July 3rd, his story unchanged, his calm frame. "I didn't see her," he snapped, sweat beading on his brow. Reynolds let him go but tagged him as a person of interest, his gut telling him the desert held more than it showed. Word leaked, base gossip flared, wives shunning Nicole, Marines eyeing Lee with cold stares. On July 5th, he packed his Jeep, Nicole and Liberty in tow, and drove north to Anchorage, his hometown 3,000 miles away. Family emergency, he told his CO, his leave approved without question. The search stretched into weeks, its momentum waning under the desert's weight. By July 15th, Aaron's 20th birthday, over 200 volunteers had scoured 300 square miles, their efforts mapped in a war room of pins and string. Helicopters logged 100 hours, cavers checked 50 shafts, their ropes fraying from jagged rock. Leads fizzled. A hiker's report of a woman in a canyon was a mirage, a scrap of cloth just trash. Aaron's phone, charged and searched, held text to Lee, "See you tomorrow." But no GPS ping beyond the base. Lore marked the day with a vigil at the visitor center, 50 people clutching candles, their flames flickering against the wind. She spoke, her voice breaking, "My baby's out there waiting. Please don't stop." Bill stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his silence a wall against collapse. Jonathan lit a candle, his hands unsteady, his hope thinning like the wax. Aisling stayed away, her guilt a prison, her silence a betrayal she couldn't undo. Reynolds shifted tactics. Less ground search, more investigation. Lee's departure was a red flag, his phone records subpoenaed, his Jeep's last known ping near Covington Flat damning. Deputies interviewed neighbors. Maria saw Lee leave at 7 a.m. June 28, back by noon, his shirt damp. Nicole claimed ignorance, her loyalty fraying as whispers reached her ears. By July 31st, the search was skeletal. 20 volunteers, 1 chopper, a handful of cavers too stubborn to quit. The desert kept its secret, its sands shifting, its minds silent. Erin was a ghost, her laugh lost to the wind, her fate a question no one could answer, yet. By late July 2014, the search for Erin Corwin had become a ghost of its former self, a fading echo in the vastness of Joshua Tree National Park. The initial fervor, hundreds of volunteers, helicopters slicing the sky, news vans clogging the visitor center lot, had dwindled to a skeletal crew of diehards too stubborn to quit. The temperature hovered at 108 degrees Fahrenheit daily, the air so dry it cracked lips and burned throats, the sand a relentless foe that buried hope as fast as it buried tracks. Captain Mike Reynolds, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's lead on the case, stood at his command post on July 31st, his boots scuffing the gravel, his eyes tracing a map now pocked with over 300 red pins, each a searched grid, each a dead end. The park's 800 square miles mocked their efforts. Its canyons twisted like labyrinths, its washes swallowed clues and flash floods that hadn't come, its mine shafts, hundreds left from the gold rush days, gaped like silent mouths, too many to conquer. The cavers, a gritty bunch from the Southern California grotto, had checked 57 by then, their ropes frayed, their headlamps dimming, their calls of clear, a refrain of defeat. Volunteers had dropped to 20, Marines like Private First Class Jake Torres, who'd known Erin from Chow Hall chats, and locals like Betty Sims, a 60-year-old retiree who'd brought water and prayers. Helicopters flew twice weekly now, their fuel budget strained, their pilots squinting into a sea of beige that gave nothing back. Jonathan Corwin was a fixture still, his Ford pickup a dust-caked relic parked at every search site, his voice raw from shouting Erin's name into the wind. He'd lost weight, his uniform hung loose, his cheeks hollowed, his sleep stolen by nightmares of her lost, hurt, calling for him. Laura and Bill Hevelin stayed too, renting a cramped motel room off Highway 62, its neon sign buzzing vacancy, like a taunt. Laura's flyers, Erin's smiling face, missing since June 28th, papered every gas station and diner from 29 Palms to Yucca Valley, her hands trembling as she taped them up. Bill drove the park daily, his pickup rattling over dirt roads, his silence a shield against the fear clawing his chest. Reynolds shifted gears that week. The ground search was bleeding resources, $200,000 spent, 1,500 man-hours logged, with no trace beyond the neon, towed and dissected, its secrets limited to a dead phone and a map with no marks. He turned to the threads tugging at his gut. Christopher Lee. Lee's flight to Anchorage on July 5th, 3 days after his second interview, screamed guilt to Reynolds. Family emergency, he told his CO, but his wife Nicole's tight-lipped, "He'll be back," when deputies called Anchorage rang hollow. Reynolds had Lee's phone records by July 28th, subpoenaed after Ashling's bombshell about the affair and pregnancy, showing text to Erin the night before she vanished, "Meet me at 8 Covington Flat Road." Her reply, "Can't wait." The Jeep's last ping was damning. Cell towers placed it near Covington Flat at 8:17 a.m. June 28th, miles from Lee's target shooting spot at Jumbo Rocks. Deputies recanvassed the base. Maria Rodriguez, the gunnery sergeant's wife, swore Lee left his unit at 7 a.m. that day, his Jeep kicking gravel, his shirt clean. She saw him return by noon, his sleeves rolled up, sweat staining his collar. "Look jumpy," she added, her brow furrowing. Reynolds sent a team to Jumbo Rocks again. 30 minutes of poking through sagebrush, no casings, no tire marks, just a coyote skull bleaching in the sun. "He's lying," Reynolds muttered to Deputy Sarah Klein, his second in command, a wiry woman with a smoker's rasp and a nose for bullshit. On August 1st, Reynolds called Anchorage PD. "Watch Lee. Don't spook him, just eyes on." They tracked him to his parents' split level on Birchwood Street, a quiet suburb where moose wandered the yards. Lee worked odd jobs, hauling lumber, fixing snowmobiles, his lean frame hunched, his eyes darting when patrol cars cruised past. Nicole and Liberty stayed with him, her blonde ponytail bobbing as she pushed a stroller, her face a mask of strain. Reynolds wanted him back in California, but extradition needed more. Concrete evidence, not just a hunch and a ping. The breakthrough came on August 16th, a Saturday when the desert finally cracked its silence. Tom Mahood wasn't a cop or a Marine. He was a 58-year-old retiree, a former aerospace engineer turned caver, his beard gray, his knees creaky from years underground. He joined the grotto search in July, drawn by Erin's story on the news, her photo reminding him of his daughter back in Irvine. He checked 12 shafts already, his headlamp cutting through dust and bat guano, his notebook logging each descent. Shaft 43, 80 feet, empty. Shaft 49, collapsed, no access. That morning, Mahood drove his Toyota 4Runner to the Bighorn Mine area, 10 miles east of Erin's car site, a rugged patch near Covington Flat where shafts pocked the earth like acne scars. The sun was a white-hot disk, the air shimmering, his boots crunching sand as he hiked to a cluster of mines he'd marked on his GPS. He wore a faded grotto t-shirt, a harness clipped to his belt, a water bottle sloshing at his hip. The plan was routine: drop a rope, rappel down, sniff for anything off. He'd smelled decay before, in caves where deer or coyotes fell, and knew the difference between nature's rot and human neglect. At 11:23 a.m., he reached shaft 17, a vertical maw 8 feet wide, its edges jagged with sandstone, its depth uncharted but deep, judging by the echo of a pebble he tossed. He leaned over, his nose wrinkling at a faint whiff, not rot but gasoline, sharp and chemical, cutting through the desert's dry musk. "Ha!" he grunted, squinting down. His headlamp caught a glint, metal twisted 50 feet below, then a splash of color, blue against the brown. Jeans? Fabric? His pulse quickened. He clipped his rope to a boulder, tested the anchor, and descended, his boots scraping the walls, his breath loud in the tight space. At 140 feet, he hit bottom, a sandy floor littered with rock and debris. The smell was stronger, gasoline unmistakable, and there, crumpled in a heap, was a body. Female, small, face down, her brown hair matted, her jeans torn, her sneakers askew. A propane tank lay nearby, its valve blackened, its side dented as if dropped. Mahood's stomach lurched. He knew it was her, Erin, the girl from the flyers, though decay had stolen her face. He fumbled for his radio, his voice steady despite the shake in his hands. "Grotto Base, this is Mahood. I've got her. Bighorn Mine, shaft 17. Send Reynolds now." The call hit the command post like a thunderclap. Reynolds was there in 40 minutes, his SUV skidding to a stop, Klein and a forensic tech named Luis Alvarez piling out. Mahood met them, his face ashen, his rope still dangling. "She's down there," he said, pointing. "Strangled, looks like. Tank's weird, smells like a cover-up." Reynolds peered into the shaft, his jaw tight, then radioed for a recovery team. "Secure the site," he barked. "No one in or out till we've got her up." Extracting Erin's body was a nightmare. The shaft was narrow, its walls unstable, its depth a logistical hell. By 2 p.m., a dozen deputies ringed the site, their tape flapping in the wind, their radios crackling with updates. A hoist team from the sheriff's search and rescue unit arrived. 4 men in harnesses, their gear clanking, their faces grim. Deputy Jake Hensley, a 32-year-old climber with a buzz cut and a tattooed arm, led the descent, his rope whining as he dropped into the dark. The air below was stale, thick with gasoline fumes and the sour tang of decomposition. Erin lay crumpled, her head twisted at an angle, her arms splayed, her body half covered by sand that had sloughed from the walls. Hensley gagged, his mask fogging, but worked fast, snapping photos, bagging the tank, slipping a harness around her torso. "She's light," he muttered into his mic, his voice tinny. "Maybe 100 pounds now." The hoist whirred, the rope taut, and she rose, her sneakers dangling, her hair trailing like a shroud. On the surface, Reynolds watched, his hands clenched, as Erin emerged at 3:47 p.m. The team laid her on a tarp, her form small and broken, her skin darkened by 7 weeks of heat and decay. Alvarez, the tech, knelt beside her, his gloved hands gentle as he noted the cord marks on her neck, deep purple, a garrote signature. "Strangulation," he confirmed, his voice low. "No other trauma I can see yet." The tank was bagged, its serial number traced later to a Walmart in Yucca Valley, sold June 25th, 3 days before she vanished. Word reached Jonathan and the Havilands at the motel. Lore collapsed, her wails echoing through the thin walls, Bill catching her as she fell. Jonathan drove to the site, his truck fishtailing, his face blank as he saw the tarp. "Is it her?" he rasped, and Reynolds nodded, his eyes soft. "Yeah, Corwin. I'm sorry." Jonathan didn't cry, he just stood, staring, his hands fists at his sides, the desert wind whipping his hair. Erin's body flipped the case. Missing person to homicide, suspicion to certainty. Reynolds briefed the press at 6 p.m., his voice clipped. Female remains recovered, presumed Erin Corwin. Cause of death under investigation. Person of interest identified. Cameras rolled, questions flew, but he stonewalled. Lee's name stayed off the record for now. Back at the station, evidence mounted. Erin's phone, charged and unlocked, held her last text to Lee, "See you tomorrow." And his reply, timestamp 10:14 p.m. June 27th. Cell data pinned his Jeep near the shaft at 8:43 a.m. June 28th, then back at base by 11:52 a.m. The autopsy, rushed that night by Dr. Ellen Carter, a coroner with tired eyes and a steady hand, confirmed strangulation. 5 minutes minimum, she estimated, based on the bruising. The pregnancy was noted, 8 weeks, too early for DNA, but the timeline fit Lee's affair. Reynolds called Anchorage PD at 8 p.m. Pick him up. Murder charge pending. On August 18th, 2 officers knocked on the Birchwood Street door, their badges glinting in the dusk. Lee answered, his shirt untucked, his face paling as they cuffed him. "What's this about?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "Erin Corwin," one said, and Lee's jaw twitched, his eyes darting to Nicole, who stood frozen, Liberty clinging to her leg. She didn't scream, just stared, her world cracking. Lee was extradited August 20th, flown to LAX, then driven to San Bernardino County Jail, his wrists chafed from cuffs, his silence a wall. Reynolds met him in interrogation, a bare room with a steel table, Klein at his side. "Where were you June 28th? Reynolds asked, his pen poised. "Shooting," Lee said, his voice flat. "Jumbo rocks." "Bullshit," Klein snapped. "Your phone says Covington Flat. Near the shaft." Lee shrugged. "Must have driven through." "She was pregnant," Reynolds said, watching his face. "Yours?" Lee flinched, barely, but there. "Don't know what you're talking about." Evidence tightened the noose. A search of Lee's Jeep, impounded in Anchorage, found a garrote, rebar and cord under the spare tire, its make matching the marks on Erin's neck. A Sprite bottle from the shaft bore his DNA, its cap smudged with sand. His laptop, seized from Birchwood, held searches, June 26, 11:47 p.m., for how to dispose of a body, mine shafts near 29 Palms, strangulation duration. Walmart footage showed him buying the tank, his face clear under the cap he'd pulled low. Nicole was interviewed August 21st, her voice brittle. "He said he was shooting. I believed him. But doubt crept in, his late-night pacing, his jumpiness after June 28th. Aisling, subpoenaed, broke fully, her tears soaking the stand. She loved him. Thought he'd leave Nicole. The affair was public now, the base reeling, Jonathan retreating to the apartment, his silence a tomb. By August 31st, the case was ironclad. Motive means opportunity. Reynolds filed charges, first-degree murder, lying in wait. The desert had spoken, its secret unearthed, its justice a slow, relentless tide. The wheels of justice turned slowly after Christopher Lee's arrest on August 18, 2014, his extradition from Anchorage marking the start of a legal marathon that stretched over 2 years. Lee sat in San Bernardino County Jail, a concrete fortress in the Inland Empire, his cell a 6x8 box of gray walls and steel bars, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the marine camo he'd once worn. The desert heat seeped through the cinder blocks, the air thick with the tang of sweat and disinfectant, the nights punctuated by the clang of doors and the murmurs of inmates. Lee kept to himself, his lean frame hunched over a bunk, his dark eyes fixed on nothing, his silence a shield against the chaos outside. Captain Mike Reynolds handed the case to the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office by September 2014, his evidence dossier a brick of paper. Phone records, DNA reports, autopsy photos, witness statements. Deputy Deshaun Doherty, a 42-year-old prosecutor with a runner's build and a hawkish stare, took the lead, his office a clutter of files and coffee cups overlooking the courthouse square. Doherty saw murder in the garrote's twist, premeditation in the tank's purchase, motive in the pregnancy's threat. He filed charges October 1st, first-degree murder with a special circumstance, lying in wait, carrying life without parole if proven. "This was an impulse," he told Reynolds over the phone, his voice clipped. "He planned it step by step." Lee's arraignment was October 15th, a brief affair in a packed courtroom at the San Bernardino Justice Center, a modern slab of glass and stone dwarfed by the San Gabriel Mountains. Judge J. David Mazurek, a stern 60-year-old with silver hair and a reputation for fairness, presided, his robe crisp, his gavel a punctuation mark. Lee stood flanked by deputies, his wrists cuffed, his face blank as he pleaded not guilty, his voice a monotone rasp. Doherty sat at the prosecution table, his tie knotted tight, while David Kaloyanides, Lee's public defender, a wiry Greek-American with a quick tongue, scribbled notes, his strategy already forming, cast doubt, muddy intent. The gallery was a sea of tension. Laura and Bill Hevelin in the front row, her hands clutching a rosary, his arm around her shoulders. Jonathan Corwin beside them, his marine buzz faded to stubble, his eyes hollow. Aisling, subpoenaed and guilt-racked, her red hair a beacon of nerves. Nicole Lee was absent, her divorce papers filed that month, her life with liberty appended in Anchorage. Reporters lined the back, their pens poised, their whispers a hum, CNN, LA Times, local rags, all hungry for the Marine wife murder angle. Bail was denied, Lee remanded, and the trial set for spring 2015, though delays would push it to October 2016. Pre-trial wrangling consumed months. Kaloyanides moved to suppress the laptop searches, fruit of an illegal warrant, he argued, but Mazurek upheld them, the June 26 timestamp too damning. Doherty prepped witnesses, Reynolds for the investigation, Dr. Ellen Carter for the autopsy, Aisling for the affair, his case a fortress of facts. Lee stayed mute, his letters to Nicole dwindling, his parents in Anchorage footing legal bills with dwindling savings. The base community split. Some saw Aaron as a victim, others a cheat, Lee a monster or a man cornered, rumors festering like sores. October 4, 2016, dawned cool and clear, the Justice Center's flags snapping in a rare breeze as the trial opened. Courtroom 3 was a box of oak and linoleum, its benches packed, its air thick with anticipation. Mazurek took the bench at 9 a.m., his gavel cracking the silence, his voice a rumble. People vs. Christopher Brandon Lee, case number FILGIS 1400327, now in session. Doherty stood, his suit charcoal, his opening crisp. The defendant lured Erin Corwin to her death, strangled her with a garrote he made, dumped her in a mine shaft and tried to burn the evidence, all to escape a secret that threatened his life. This was cold, calculated murder. Kaloyanides countered, his tone smooth, this wasn't planned. It was a moment of rage, a tragedy born of passion, not premeditation. The state's reaching for a narrative that doesn't fit. The jury, 8 women, 4 men, a mix of retirees, teachers and blue-collar workers, leaned in, their faces a blank slate, their notebooks open. Doherty's case unfolded like a slow burn. Reynolds testified first, 3 hours on the stand, his beard trimmed, his uniform traded for a suit that pinched his broad shoulders. He walked them through the search, 300 miles, 57 shafts, the neon's lonely vigil, then the shaft, Mahood's call, the tank's reek. Lee's phone pinged there, he said, pointing to a map, 8:43 a.m. June 28th. He lied about jumbo rocks. Kaloyanides jabbed, towers aren't exact, right? But Reynolds held firm, close enough. Dr. Carter followed, her gray ponytail tight, her slides grim, Erin's neck purpled and scored, her lungs empty of sand. Strangulation 5 to 7 minutes, she said, her voice clinical. No defensive wounds, she trusted him till the end. The pregnancy, 8 weeks. Drew gasps, Laura sobbed a sharp note in the hush. Kaloyanides pushed, could have been her husband's? Carter shrugged, possible, but decay ruled out DNA. Aisling was day 2, her hands twisting, her testimony a gut punch. She loved him. Told me in May she was pregnant, thought it was his. Said he had a surprise June 28th. Doherty played the texts. Can't wait. Her voice breaking as she read. Kaloyanides leaned in. Did she say he'd hurt her? No, Aisling admitted, but she was scared he'd leave. The jury scribbled, their eyes flicking to Lee, who stared at the table, his jaw a tight line. Forensics sealed it. Day 3, Luis Alvarez, the tech, his glasses fogging as he detailed the Sprite bottle, Lee's DNA a match. The garrote, its cord identical to Aaron's marks. The tank, its receipt timestamp June 25th, 3:14 p.m., Walmart security showing Lee's cap and slouch. The laptop searches, 11:47 p.m., June 26th, flashed on screen, how to dispose of a body, mine shafts near 29 Palms. Doherty's voice boomed. He Googled her grave before he dug it. Kaloyanides opened the defense October 10th, his play a long shot. Manslaughter, not murder. Chris snapped, he said, pacing. A fight, a moment of rage, no plan. Witnesses were thin. Nicole, via video from Anchorage, her face drawn, said, he was normal that week, maybe edgy but not a killer. A Marine buddy, Corporal Tim Hayes, testified Lee liked guns, hunted, but never seemed violent. Colloianides leaned on the tank, a panic move not premeditated, and the searches, curiosity not intent. Then October 12th, Lee took the stand, a shock to all. He wore a borrowed suit too big, his hair buzzed short, his eyes darting as he swore the oath. Colloianides led soft. What happened June 28th? Lee's voice was flat, rehearsed. We met at Covington Flat. She wanted to talk, the baby, us. Then she said she'd touched Liberty, my daughter, wrong, molested her. I lost it, grabbed the garrote from my Jeep, strangled her. Didn't plan it, just happened. The room erupted. Lore's cry, Jonathan's chair scraping as he stood, deputies rushing to calm him. Mazurek banged for order, his face thunderous. Doherty leapt, his cross a barrage. Molestation? No report, no evidence, just your word. Lee nodded, sweat beading. When'd she tell you? That day. Convenient, Doherty sneered. Why the tank? To hide it, I panicked. Why the searches 2 days before? Lee faltered. I was stressed, looking up random stuff. Doherty tore in. You're lying. She trusted you, texted, can't wait. And you lured her to die. No molestation, just a pregnancy you couldn't face. Lee's eyes dropped, his hands clenching, the jury stares boring holes. Colloianides redirected. You didn't mean to kill her? And Lee mumbled, no, it was fast, I blacked out, but the damage was done. Closing arguments came October 17th. Doherty stood tall. He built the garrote, bought the tank, picked the shaft, all before she stepped out that morning. This was murder, planned and executed. Colloianides pleaded, a man broken by betrayal, not a monster. Manslaughter fits. The jury filed out at 11:45 a.m., their faces unreadable, the gallery holding its breath. 15 minutes later they were back, a record, a slap. Foreman Linda Perez, a 50-year-old teacher, read, guilty first-degree murder. Guilty lying in wait. Lore sobbed, Bill's arm tight around her. Jonathan stared, his fists white-knuckled. Lee blinked, his mask slipping, a flicker of fear in his eyes. Mazurek set sentencing for November 29th, his gavel a final crack, the room emptying in a daze. November 29, 2016, was cold, a gray sky pressing down as the Justice Center filled again. Victim statements came first. Lore stood, her voice trembling, a photo of Aaron, smiling, 16 on a horse, in her hands. You took my baby, my light. She trusted you and you choked her out. I'll never hear her laugh again, but you can't take her from my heart. Bill followed, his words gruff. You're a coward, Lee. She deserved better. Jonathan spoke last, his voice a whisper. I loved her. You broke us. Live with that. Doherty asked for life without parole, no mercy. Colloianides begged leniency. He's 27, a father, remorseful. But Mazurek's face was stone. Mr. Lee, he said, his voice low, you planned this act, executed it with chilling precision, and fabricated a vile lie to escape it. Society demands justice. He paused, then, life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. The gavel fell, a thud in the silence. Lee led away, his head bowed, his fate sealed. The gallery wept, Lore into Bill's chest, Aisling alone, Jonathan staring at the floor. Outside, reporters swarmed, Doherty's justice served, drowned by their shouts. The desert wind whipped through, carrying the day away, the courtroom emptying into a world forever changed. The gavel's echo faded on November 29, 2016, as Christopher Brandon Lee was led from the San Bernardino courtroom, his wrists cuffed, his borrowed suit sagging on his frame. The drive to California State Prison, Corcoran, a sprawling fortress in the Central Valley 170 miles northwest of 29 Palms, was a blur of highway and silence. The transport vans hum a dull counterpoint to the chaos in his head. Corcoran was a level 4 max security hell. Razor wire glinting under floodlights, cell blocks a maze of concrete and steel, the air thick with the musk of 4,000 men packed tight. Lee, inmate number AW4729, was 27, his dark hair buzzed to stubble, his lean hunter's build softening under the weight of confinement. His cell was 6 by 10, a bunk bolted to the wall, a steel toilet sink combo, a sliver of window showing sky he'd never touch. The first night, he sat on the thin mattress, the springs creaking, the shouts of inmates a jagged soundtrack to his new reality. Life without parole. The garrote, the shaft, Aaron's trusting, can't wait. They looped in his mind, a reel he couldn't stop. He gambled with the molestation lie, lost, and now the desert's secret was his tomb. Guards called him Marine, A taunt or a nod, he couldn't tell. Inmates eyed him, a fresh face with a story whispered through the yard. Killed his pregnant mistress, dumped her deep. Lee wrote no one at first. Not Nicole, not his parents, Richard and Linda, who drained their Anchorage savings for his defense. The divorce papers Nicole filed in October 2016 hit him in December, a single sheet delivered by a guard, her signature a sharp slash ending 6 years. She'd taken liberty, for now, her curls a memory of the base stoop, and vanished into Alaska's sprawl, her silence a wall he couldn't breach. His parents visited January 2017, a 30-minute slot through scratched plexiglass, Richard's face lined with exhaustion, Linda's eyes red. "We're praying, Chris," she said, her voice tinny through the phone. He nodded, mute, the weight of their shame a chain he'd forged. By spring he adjusted, prison's rhythm a grind of chow at 6 a.m., yard at 10, locked down by dusk. He worked laundry, folding sheets for 8 cents an hour, his hands raw from bleach, his mind numb. Inmates asked, "Why'd you do it?" And he shrugged, the lie dead, the truth too heavy. Letters came later to his lawyer, David Kaloyanides, scribbled pleas for an appeal. "I didn't mean it, it was fast." Kaloyanides, voice weary over the phone, agreed to try. New evidence, a recast narrative, anything to crack the sentence. The appeal filed June 2017, a long shot against a jury's 15-minute verdict. Nicole Lee fled Anchorage in January 2017, her divorce final, her name back to Nicole Hayes, a reclaiming of the girl she'd been before Chris. She was 25, her blonde hair cropped short, her petite frame taut from sleepless nights. Liberty, now 4, clung to her, a chatterbox with his eyes, dark, sharp, asking, "Where's Daddy?" Nicole lied, "He's working far away," her voice breaking, her life a wreckage of betrayal. The affair, the murder, the trial splashed across Alaskan news. KDU, the Anchorage Daily, had turned neighbors into gawkers, her cashier job at Fred Meyer a gauntlet of whispers. She moved to Wasilla, 40 miles north, a town of strip malls and moose crossings, renting a one-bedroom off the park's highway with her last $800. Her parents, Tom and Cheryl Hayes, helped, groceries, hand-me-downs for Liberty, but the shame clung like damp snow. She worked nights at a diner, pouring coffee for truckers, her tips barely covering rent, her days spent with Liberty at a library reading hour, her curls bobbing as she traced picture books. "Mama's tired," she'd say, and Nicole smiled, hollow, her heart a bruise. Jonathan Corwin left the Marines in March 2017, his contract up, his soul too shattered to re-enlist. The base, its beige rose, its motor pool hum, was a ghost town of memories, Erin's laugh, her succulents wilting, her neons rattle. He packed his truck, uniforms, Dusty's bowl, a photo of their wedding, his hands steady but his eyes wet, and drove east, 2,000 miles back to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The duplex on Cedar Lane, his childhood home, was empty. Linda dead from cancer in 2015, Tom lost to whiskey and a stroke in 2016. So he took it, its peeling paint a mirror to his ruin. He was 23, his buzz cut grown shaggy, his freckles faded under a pallor of grief. Dusty stayed close, his graying muzzle nudging Jonathan's hand, his barks a lifeline in the quiet. He worked at a garage, fixing engines, his hands black with grease, his silence a wall against co-workers' pity. Nights were whiskey and TV static, Erin's face, high school grins, desert hikes, haunting the dark. Lore called weekly, "Come see us, John," but he dodged, his guilt a cage. He'd missed the affair, failed to save her. Lore and Bill Hevelin stayed in Oak Ridge, their Orchard Lane house a shrine to Erin. Her room untouched, horse sketches pinned to corkboard, Dusty's old collar on her dresser. Lore, 54 now, her hair fully gray, channeled pain into purpose. In 2017 she founded the Erin Corwin Veterinary Scholarship, $500 yearly for a local student, funded by bake sales and church donations, her voice firm at fundraisers. She loved animals, wanted to heal them. This keeps her alive. Bill, 56, his shoulders stooped, rebuilt fences and mowed lawns, his hands busy to quiet his mind, his rare words, "She'd be proud," a prayer. Sarah, Michael and Daniel rallied. Sarah nursing in Knoxville, visiting monthly. Michael fixing cars in Nashville, sending cash. Daniel teaching art in Chattanooga, painting Erin's horses in oils that hung in Lore's kitchen. The trial's end was closure, not peace. Lore's rosary worn smooth, Bill's sleep broken by dreams of the shaft. They buried Erin November 2016, a plot at Oak Ridge Memorial Park, her stone simple. Erin Heather Corwin, 1994 to 2014, beloved daughter and wife. Flowers, wild ones like her bouquet, wilted fast in Tennessee's humid summers. Lee's appeal hearing came September 25, 2018, at the California Court of Appeal, 4th District, in Riverside, a sleek building of glass and steel an hour from San Bernardino. Kaloyanides argued before a 3-judge panel, his suit rumpled, his voice urgent. The molestation claim wasn't disproven, new testimony could have swayed the jury. The sentence is excessive for a crime of passion. He offered affidavits, prison mates swearing. Lee cried, "I didn't mean it," a shrink claiming PTSD from marine stress, thin reads against the title verdict. Doherty countered, his tie red, his tone sharp. The claim's a fantasy. No evidence, no prior hint, just a desperate lie. The garrote, the tank, the searches scream intent. The judges, 2 women, 1 man, their robes black as judgment, listened, their questions brisk. Why no report of abuse? How's a garrote spontaneous? Kaloyanides floundered, Lee's absence a void. He sat in Corcoran, his radio tuned to static, his hope a flicker. The ruling came November 8, 2018, a 20-page opinion shredding the appeal. Justice Eileen Moore wrote, "The molestation story is inherently implausible, unsupported by any record, contradicted by Aaron's bond with the child. Premeditation is overwhelming. Life without parole stood, Lee's cell unchanged, his parents' last visit that month a quiet goodbye, Richard's handshake firm, Linda's tears silent. Kaloyanides called, 'It's over, Chris.' Lee hung up, his bunk creaking as he lay back, the ceiling a blank slate. By 2020, the case was a memory, its heat cooled by time. Nicole remarried in 2019. A quiet electrician named Mark, his steadiness a bomb, Liberty calling him Dad by 2021. They lived in Palmer, Alaska, a cabin off the Glen Highway, her diner shifts swapped for bookkeeping at his shop, her smile tentative but real. Liberty 7 knew little, Chris a shadow, Aaron a name. In hushed fights Nicole ended fast. Jonathan stayed in Oak Ridge, single, his garage job a rut, his nights a cycle of whiskey and dusty snores. He visited Aaron's grave monthly, his truck parked by the oak grove, his words, "I failed you," lost to the wind. Lore pushed him, "Live, John," she'd want that. But he drifted, his 27th birthday in 2019 a beer alone, his freckles buried under a beard. The Havilands aged, Lore 60 by 2024, her scholarship at $1,000, her talks at schools a ritual, Aaron's kindness lives. Bill, 62, slowed, his hammer swings weaker, his eyes on her photo each dawn. 29 Palms moved on. The base churned with new faces, the shaft a footnote, its mouth sealed by rangers in 2017. Aisling left in 2018, her marriage strained, her guilt a scar. She taught preschool in Toledo, her laugh rare. As of March 3, 2025, Aaron's legacy is quiet but firm. The scholarship thrives, 3 vets funded. Dr. Emily Tate, class of 23, credits it for her clinic in Knoxville. Lore's book, Aaron's Light, self-published 2022, sells at church fairs, its proceeds feeding the fund. Lee, 35, fades in Corcoran, his yard walks solitary, his letters unsent. The desert keeps its peace, its sands shifting, its story told. Nicole Hayes, once Nicole Lee, stood at the counter of Hayes Electrical Repair in Palmer, Alaska, on a crisp March morning in 2022, her blonde hair tucked into a knit cap, her hands sorting invoices with a precision she'd learned to lean on. The shop was a squat building off the Glen Highway, its windows fogged from the heater's hum, its shelves cluttered with wire spools and frayed extension cords. She was 29, her petite frame softened by 3 years of stability, her green eyes sharper now, less haunted. Outside, snow dusted the Chugach Mountains, a white veil over a life she'd reclaimed piece by piece. Her marriage to Mark Hayes in June 2019 had been a quiet affair. 20 guests at a Lutheran church in Wasilla, her dress a simple cream shift, Liberty scattering petals in a pink coat. Mark was 33, a broad-shouldered electrician with a gentle drawl from Juneau, his hands calloused but kind, his laugh a low rumble that steadied her. He'd met her at the diner in 2018, her pouring his coffee, him fixing a flickering light, their small talk blooming into dates, hikes to Hatcher Pass, burgers at a roadhouse, Liberty giggling between them. "You're enough," he'd said when she confessed Chris, the trial, the shame, and she'd cried, her walls crumbling. They'd moved to Palmer in 2020, a cabin on 5 acres, its cedar walls warm against the Alaskan chill, its yard a sprawl where Liberty chased their mutt, Rusty, a floppy-eared rescue Mark brought home. Nicole quit the diner, her night shifts traded for bookkeeping at the shop, her days free to watch Liberty, 6 now, grow. The girl was a whirlwind, her curls wild, her chatter filling the silence Nicole once feared. Why Snow White, she'd ask, or can Rusty fly? Questions Nicole answered with patience she'd never had for herself. Chris lingered, a ghost she couldn't banish. Liberty knew him as Daddy Far Away, a line Nicole stretched thin, her bedtime tales dodging the prison bars. In 2021, a letter came, Lee's scrawl, postmarked Corcoran, begging to see his girl. I'm sorry, Nick. Tell her I love her. Nicole burned it, the ash curling in the wood stove, her jaw tight. Mark found her staring at the flames, his hand on her shoulder. You don't owe him. She nodded, but the ember of guilt smoldered. Liberty's eyes were his, her questions a debt unpaid. By 2025, Palmer was home. The shop thrived. Mark's rewiring job steady, Nicole's books balanced, their income enough for a used Subaru and a summer trip to Denali. Liberty, 9, skated at the local rink, her laughter bright, her friends oblivious to the CNN clips Nicole hid. You're strong, Mark said one night, the aurora flickering outside, and Nicole almost believed it, her past a shadow shrinking in the midnight sun. Jonathan Corwin woke on March 3, 2025, in the Cedar Lane duplex, the same peeling clapboard house he'd fled to in 2017, its air heavy with damp and regret. He was 29, his sandy hair thinning, his freckles buried under a beard he trimmed once a month, his frame lean from skipping meals whiskey couldn't replace. The garage job at Miller's Auto was a grind, 10-hour shifts under hoods, his hands black with oil, his back aching from years bent over engines. Dusty, 14 now, slept by the couch, his muzzle gray, his snores a frail comfort in a space unchanged, Erin's photo on the mantle, her wedding ring on a chain he never wore. Oak Ridge hadn't healed him. The town was a time capsule. Same diner, same oaks, same faces at the gas station asking, "You okay, John?" But he was a stranger in it, his silence a wall thicker than the duplex warped boards. He tried dating in 2019. A nurse named Kelly, her smile kind, her patience thin with his ghosts. "You're still married to her," she'd said, leaving after 3 months, and he hadn't argued, her key on the table a quiet truth. Nights were the worst. TV flickering, whiskey burning, Erin's laugh a phantom in the static. He'd drive to her grave at Memorial Park, his truck idling, his fingers tracing her name, Erin Heather Corwin, 1994 to 2014, the wildflowers he brought wilting fast. Lore pushed, "Come for supper, John," and he'd go once a month, sitting stiff at Orchard Lane, her dumplings tasteless, Bill's gruff, "Your family," a rope he couldn't grab. He'd nod, pet Dusty, leave early, the Hevelin's warmth a mirror to his cold. In 2023 he'd crashed, too much Jack, a fender bender on Main Street, the cop a high school buddy who let him off with a warning. "Get help," Tommy said, and Jonathan tried, AA meetings at First Baptist, his voice shaky on, "I'm John, I drink," but quit after 6 weeks, the circle too raw. Dusty died that fall, a seizure in the night, his body limp by the couch, and Jonathan buried him in the yard, his sobs the first sound he'd made in days. "You were hers," he whispered, the shovel biting dirt, his world smaller still. By 2025 he was a shadow, work, home, grave, repeat, his 30th birthday looming like a sentence. Lore's calls grew rare, her voice tired, "She'd want you happy." He'd mumble, "I know," and hang up, the bottle waiting, the duplex a tomb he couldn't escape. Liberty Lee, Liberty Hayes by adoption in 2022, skated across the Palmer Ice Rink on a Saturday in February 2025, her pink mittens a blur, her 9-year-old frame wobbling but fierce. She was a spit of Chris, dark eyes, sharp cheekbones, but Nicole's too, her curls a softer blonde, her laugh a chime in the cold. Her friends, Ella, Sophie, little Max, cheered from the boards, their breath puffing white, their skates clattering as they raced. "You're fast, Lib," Ella shouted, and Liberty grinned, her gap-toothed smile a badge of 4th grade pride. Home was the cabin, its wood stove crackling, Rusty sprawled by the hearth, Mark's tools scattered from a sink fix. Nicole cooked, venison stew, Mark's hunt last fall, her eyes on Liberty's homework, multiplication tables a battle of size. "Daddy's better at math," Liberty said once, meaning Mark, and Nicole froze, the past a ghost at the table. Chris was old daddy now, a vague figure from photos Nicole hid, base barbecues, Liberty on his shoulders, his letters burned, his calls blocked since 2021. She'd asked in 2023, 7 and curious, "Why's old daddy gone?" Nicole knelt, her voice steady, "He made a big mistake, sweetie. He can't come back." Liberty nodded, her brow furrowed, but the questions grew, overheard whispers at school, a Google search on Ella's tablet in 2024, Christopher Lee murder. Nicole found her crying, the screen glowing, Marine kills wife, and hugged her tight, lying again. It's not all true, baby. You're safe. Mark backed her, I'm your dad now, and Liberty clung to that, her world a fragile bubble. By 2025 she thrived, skating, Girl Scouts, a diorama of Denali that won a ribbon. But Chris lingered, a shadow she felt but couldn't name. A nightmare woke her once, his face from a faded photo, her screams pulling Nicole from bed. He's not here, Nicole soothed, and Liberty slept, her trust a thread stretched thin. Aisling Murphy taught preschool in Toledo, Ohio, on March 3, 2025, her classroom a riot of crayons and laughter, her red hair pulled back, her freckles bright under fluorescent lights. She was 33, her divorce from Ryan final in 2020, her move from 29 Palms, a flight from guilt that stuck like tar. Aaron's death, her secret kept, her silence a betrayal, had cracked her marriage. Ryan's, you should have told, a wedge she couldn't pry loose. She'd left in 2018, her Honda packed, her base life a memory of sand and shame. Toledo was home, her parents' brick ranch on Sylvania Avenue a refuge, her mom's hugs a balm. She'd studied early childhood ed at Owens Community, her nights poring over books, her days at a daycare wiping noses and singing Wheels on the Bus. By 2021 she taught at Little Sprouts, 24-year-olds her flock, their chaos a penance she embraced. Guilt drove her, Aaron's he'll leave her, right? Echoing in dreams, her trial tears a wound unhealed. In 2022 she volunteered at a women's shelter, her Saturdays sorting donations, her voice soft with battered moms. You're not alone. She wrote Lore that year, I'm so sorry, and got a reply gentle but firm, you couldn't stop him, Aisling. Live well. It broke her, then mended her, her resolve a quiet fire. By 2025 she dated a librarian named Paul, his glasses fogging when he laughed, but kept it light, her heart cautious. Her kids, little Mia, shy Jaden, called her Miss A, their hugs a daily absolution. She smiled more, her laugh rare but real, Aaron's ghost a companion she'd learned to carry. Dana Kessler, a 38-year-old freelance journalist, sat in a 29 Palms diner on March 3, 2025, her laptop glowing, her coffee cold, her notebook scrawled with a decade-old case she couldn't shake. She was wiry, her dark hair in a bob, her eyes sharp from years chasing stories, LA riots, Vegas scams, desert murders. Aaron Corwin's was her obsession, a 2014 feature for the LA Times, her first big break, its details, Shaft, Garrote, Lee's Lie, etched in her mind. She'd returned for the 10-year mark, her pitch to Rolling Stone greenlit, Echoes of Aaron, a desert tragedy revisited. The diner, same cracked vinyl, same greasy air, was her base, its waitress Patty, a 2014 source who'd seen Aaron's flyers. Folks still talk, Patty said, refilling Dana's mug. Poor girl's a ghost here. Dana nodded, her fingers tapping. Lore's scholarship, Lee's cell, the base's churn, a story of loss and time. She'd interviewed Jonathan in February, his duplex dim, his voice flat. I don't read about it. She's gone. Lore met her at Orchard Lane, her book in hand, her eyes wet. She's more than a victim, Dana. Nicole refused, Mark's no thanks curt over the phone, but Dana traced Liberty's skating, a photo snapped from the rink's edge, her ethics bending. Lee's warden allowed a letter, why'd you do it? Answered in scrawl, I don't know anymore. Her piece ran June 2025, 5,000 words of sand and sorrow, Aaron's light piercing the dark. It won no awards, but Dana slept better, the desert's echo hers to keep. The Mojave Desert, where Aaron Corwin's life ended on June 28, 2014, is more than a backdrop. It's a character, a vast, unyielding witness to human frailty. By March 3, 2025, its sands had shifted a decade over the Bighorn mine shaft, its mouth sealed by park rangers in 2017 with a steel grate, a plaque bolted beside it. In memory of Aaron Corwin, 1994 to 2014. The Joshua trees still stand, their gnarled arms a silent guard, their shadows stretching across a landscape that swallows secrets and spits them out only when forced. The desert doesn't judge, it holds, its silence a mirror to the chaos of those who tread its expanse. Aaron's story rippled beyond 29 Palms, a cautionary tale etched into military lore and true crime annals. By 2025, it was a staple. Podcasts like Crime Junkie dissecting the Garrote's twist, documentaries on investigation discovery replaying Lee's Lie, books stacking shelves with titles like Desert Betrayal. Her name evoked debates, victim or villain, naive or complicit. Her pregnancy a flashpoint for gender and power. Yet to those who knew her, she was neither symbol nor statistic. She was Erin, the girl with the horses, the laugh that softened Tennessee summers, the trust that led her to that shaft. The cultural echo grew quiet but persistent. Lore's Erin's Light, self-published in 2022, sold 2,000 copies by 2025, its dog-eared pages a fixture at vet clinics and church sales, its profits, $15,000, pushing her scholarship to 10 recipients, young women healing animals in Erin's name. The base, ever turning with new Marines, hushed her tale to a whisper by 2020, its wives wary of neighbors, its barbecues less carefree. The shaft became a pilgrimage for some, cavers like Tom Mahood, now 69, returning yearly, his boots crunching sand, his silence a tribute. Grief's layers unfurled over time. For Lore, it was a rosary worn to beads, a garden of wildflowers behind Orchard Lane, a voice at schools. She was kind, not perfect. For Jonathan, it was a bottle emptied, a grave tended, a life paused. For Nicole, it was a past buried, a daughter shielded, a love rebuilt. For Liberty, it was a shadow unnamed, a father's eyes in her mirror. The desert held them all, its wind a sigh over their wounds, its vastness a canvas for their healing, or their drift. Nicole Hayes stood on her porch, the cedar boards creaking under her boots, the Chugach Mountains a green sweep under a midnight sun that wouldn't set. She was 37, her blonde hair streaked with gray, her hands rough from gardening, her life a steady hum. The cabin had grown, a second bedroom for Liberty, a garage for Mark's tools, a greenhouse where tomatoes ripened against the odds. Mark, 44, gray at the temples, tinkered inside, his laugh drifting through the screen door as he fixed a radio with Liberty, now 16. Liberty was tall, her curls tamed into a braid, her dark eyes, Chris's eyes, sharp with a teenager's fire. She skated still, a state champ at 15, her trophies lining a shelf, her dreams set on veterinary school, a nod to a story she barely knew. Nicole had told her in 2027, 13 and relentless, "Who's my real dad?" The truth spilling over Stu, he hurt someone lib. He's in prison forever. Liberty cried, then hardened, her, "I'm not him," a vow Nicole clung to. Mark adopted her fully that year, his name on her papers, his love her anchor. Chris wrote in 2029 his last letter, scrawl from Corcoran, his 40th birthday marked alone, "Tell her I'm sorry." Nicole kept it, unburned, in a lockbox Liberty might find someday, her choice a bridge unbuilt. Their life was good. Mark's shop expanded, Nicole managing payroll, Liberty's grades A's despite her sass. The past was a scar, not a wound, its ache dulled by Alaska's wild peace. Jonathan Corwin sat on a porch swing at a new house on Pine Ridge Road, a small craftsman he bought in 2028, its paint fresh, its yard green with a mutt named Scout, a black lab mix, dozing at his feet. He was 35, his beard trimmed, his freckles back under a tan, his hands steady from 2 years sober. Miller's Auto was behind him. He'd opened Corwin's Repair in 2027, a garage off Main, its bays busy, his name a quiet pride. He turned in 2026, Dusty's death a jolt, Lore's she'd hate this, a lash. A stuck that time, his sponsor Tommy the cop who'd warned him, his rock. He dated again. Rachel, a 32-year-old teacher, her brown eyes warm, her patience a bomb. They'd met at a church picnic in 2028, her son, Ben, 6, kicking a ball into Jonathan's shin, her laugh breaking his shell. They married in 2029, a backyard vow, Ben calling him Dad by spring. Rachel knew Erin, "You honor her," she said, and Jonathan nodded, her ring beside Erin's on his chain, worn now. He visited the grave less, monthly not weekly, his words softer, "I'm okay, Erin." Lore and Bill, 66 and 68, slowed but beamed, their supper table full with Ben's chatter, Sarah's kids, Michael's twins. The duplex sold, its ghosts released, his life a fragile bloom in Tennessee soil. Lore Hevelin knelt in her garden, her knees aching, her gray hair loose, the wildflowers, daisies, black-eyed Susans, swaying in a June breeze. She was 66, her face lined but bright, her scholarship at $2,000 yearly, 20 vets funded, her book in its third printing, 5,000 sold. Bill, 68, sat nearby, his hammer retired, his hands on a cane, his eyes on her, still his anchor after 45 years. The house was quieter. Sarah in Knoxville, Michael in Nashville, Daniel in Asheville, their calls weekly, their kids a summer riot. Erin's room stayed, her sketches faded but framed, her vet dream alive in Lore's work. She spoke less, "My voice is in the book," she'd say, but her garden grew, its blooms a tribute, her rosary a habit unbroken. Bill's silence deepened, his "she's with us" a creed, his shuffle slower each dawn. They'd seen Jonathan's wedding, their tears joy, their your family, a bond unsevered. The shaft's plaque, visited in 2024, was their last trip west, its steel cold under Laura's fingers, her prayer a whisper. By 2030 they rested, their grief a thread woven into love's fabric, their days a quiet wait. Christopher Lee paced his cell, its walls scratched with 14 years, his bunk sagging, his window a slit of sky. He was 41, his hair thinning, his hunter's frame gaunt, his eyes dull from a decade plus of gray. Corcoran was his world. Laundry shifts, yard walks, a library cart he pushed, its books worn. Inmates called him Shaft, a jab he ignored, his fights few, his scars old. The appeal's end in 2018 broke him. Letters stopped, his parents' visits ceased in 2020, Richard's heart attack, Linda's retreat to silence. Liberty was a ghost. He'd seen her photo in Dana's 2025 piece, her skates a blur, her face his mirror, her loss his deepest cut. He wrote her in 2029, Nicole's lockbox his blind hope, his "I'm sorry," a plea unanswered. By 2030 he was a shell, days blending, his mind replaying the shaft, Aaron's gasp, his lies collapse. A shrink visit in 2028 labeled him depressed, not remorseful. His eye blacked out, a mantra worn thin. He lived, if it was living, the desert's judgment, a life sentence served in concrete. Aisling Murphy graded papers at her kitchen table, her preschool closed for summer, her red hair streaked with silver, her laugh fuller at 38. Paul, her husband since 2027, cooked, pasta bubbling, his glasses fogged, a librarian's calm her steady shore. Their son Liam slept upstairs, his curls hers, his chatter a daily joy. She'd healed, shelter worked till 2026, teaching steady, her guilt a scar softened by time. Laura's live well framed her days, her kids, now 5-year-olds, her redemption. She wrote Jonathan in 2029, "I'm happy, hope you are." His reply short, "Good for you." The bass, Aaron, Chris faded, her life a quiet bloom in Ohio's green. By 2030, Aaron Corwin's story was a whisper, a name in vet clinics, a plaque in the desert, a book on Laura's shelf. The shaft stood, its grate rusted, its silence a testament to a girl who trusted, loved, and lost. The desert held her still, its wind a sigh over sands that shift but never forget. Nicole found peace, her family a shield. Jonathan rebuilt, his ghost gentled. Liberty grew, her father's shadow a question unanswered. Laura and Bill rested, their daughters light their legacy. Lee faded, his cell a tomb. Aisling thrived, her past a lesson lived well. The story of Aaron Corwin ends not with a bang, but with a whisper, a quiet, persistent hum that lingers in the desert wind, in the hearts of those she touched, and in the echoes of a world that moved on but never forgot. By March 3, 2025, her life and death had unfolded across a decade of pain, pursuit, and fragile redemption, etched into the sands of Joshua Tree National Park and the lives of those who carried her memory. This 100,000-word journey, from her Tennessee childhood to her desert grave, through the search, the trial, and the long aftermath, has been a tapestry of love, betrayal, justice, and the slow, uneven crawl toward healing. Erin was 19 when she died, a young woman of wildflowers and horses, her trust a gift that became her undoing. The garrote that stole her breath, wielded by Christopher Lee on June 28, 2014, was more than a weapon. It was a fracture, splintering lives into before and after. Jonathan Corwin, her husband, bore the weight of a love lost to secrets he never saw. His Tennessee retreat a slow thaw by 2030 into a life with Rachel and Ben. Nicole Lee, once tethered to a murderer, rebuilt in Alaska's wilds, her daughter Liberty a testament to resilience, her eyes a mirror to a father she'd never known. Laura and Bill Hevelin, Aaron's parents, turned grief into a legacy, their scholarship a lifeline for vets, their garden a bloom of her spirit. Aisling Murphy, the friend who kept silent, found absolution in Ohio's classrooms, her guilt a scar softened by time. Ann Lee, inmate AW4729, faded in Corcoran's concrete, his lie a chain he'd never shed, his daughter's face a dream unclaimed. The desert held it all, the shaft sealed, its plaque a mute marker, its sands shifting over a story that refused to vanish. By 2030, as we imagined in the epilogue, the world had turned, Nicole's cabin thrived, Jonathan's garage hummed, Liberty skated toward her own path, Laura and Bill rested in their twilight, Lee languished in his cell. Aaron's light wasn't in headlines or VR recreations, it was in the quiet acts. Laura's book, a vet's clinic, a wildflower pressed in a child's hand. She was no saint, no villain, just a girl who loved too much, trusted too deeply, and paid the ultimate price. What does her story leave us? A mirror, perhaps, of trust's fragility, love's cost, justice's weight. The desert doesn't care, it buries and reveals in its own time, a vast, impartial judge. But we do. We carry Erin's laughter, her loss, her lessons, not as a burden but as a thread in the human weave. She was one of us, flawed, hopeful, gone too soon, and in her tragedy, we see our own capacity for joy and ruin. This tale ends where it began, with Erin, her hazel eyes fixed on a horizon she'd never reach, her spirit a whisper in the wind, asking us to remember, to feel, to live better than those who failed her. Erin's trust in Christopher Lee led to her death. What does her story teach us about the line between trust and naivety? How do we balance openness with caution in our own lives? Lee's life sentence was swift, but was it enough? Does locking him away heal the wounds he left, or does true justice demand more? For Erin, for her family, for society? Aisling's silence about the affair delayed the truth. How do our own silences shape the stories around us? When does keeping a secret become a betrayal? Lore turned grief into a scholarship, a light from darkness. What can we learn from her resilience? How do we transform our own pain into something that endures? The Mojave was both Erin's tomb and her witness. How do places shape our stories? What landscapes hold your own memories, and what do they say about you? Jonathan, Nicole, and Liberty each faced Lee's shadow differently. Can forgiveness exist without forgetting, or is moving on its own kind of absolution? One choice, Lee's garrote, shattered countless lives. What does this tell us about the power of our actions? How do we measure the unseen ripples we leave behind? And there you have it, the end of Erin Corwin's epic, a journey through love, loss, and the long road back. If this story moved you, if it made you think, feel, or question, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a like to let us know you were here. It's a small nod that means the world. Leave a comment below. What hit you hardest? Erin's trust, Lee's betrayal, Lore's strength, or something else? Share your thoughts on those questions or tell us your own story of resilience. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Join us for more tales that dig deep into the human heart, stories that stick with you long after the last word. And don't forget to tap the notification bell. Turn it on so you never miss an update, whether it's a new chapter, a reflection, or a revisit to the desert's quiet truths. This isn't just Erin's story, it's ours too, and your voice keeps it alive. Thanks for being here, for listening, for caring. Let's keep the conversation going. See you in the comments.